Okay, good morning, everybody. So we have classes here every morning, as you know. Today is Maimonides. Tomorrow is going to be everyday ethics. Wednesday is historical sketches. Thursday is Jewish psychology. And Friday is Kabbalah meditation. Also, Friday afternoon, 12:15, we have the challah baking class. Saturday morning, 9:30, we have services. This week we have a special kiddush sponsored by Marty. So now you know. Okay.
It's my pleasure. It's our pleasure.
Okay, so what are we studying about Maimonides this year? Let me just give you a brief overview what we're studying, and then we'll start. So, as we know, Maimonides wrote a lot. He was an extensive writer. He began in his early teenage years, and he wrote, the first thing was his commentary to the Talmud. Talmud being the body of Jewish law and everything that went into formulating the law. And so he began, the first thing was a commentary to the Talmud, called in Hebrew Pirush HaMishnayot La Rambam, the commentary to the Mishnah. And it took him about a decade to write. He wrote that originally in Arabic. And although he started writing it at a very young age, you see from that body of work the genius of Maimonides. And not only was he knowledgeable in all of Judaic literature, but he was knowledgeable in Greek literature, philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, others. He was familiar with other theologies, Muslim theologies at the time. And he incorporates a lot of that conversation in some of his commentary as well. Later, he codified all the Jewish law known as Mishnah Torah, which is like sort of literally translated as sort of like assistant to scripture, second to scripture, which is basically, he says, well, if you study scripture and you study this body of work, you'll know how to practice Judaism. And that was written in Hebrew. Later, he wrote the Guide to the Perplexed, which was also written in Arabic. And then we have other response of Maimonides, his medical writings. Maimonides was a physician. And so what we've done this year is we've taken one part of his commentary to the Talmud, and we focused on that. The Talmud is divided into what's called 6 orders, 6 general sections. And each order is divided into tractates dealing with a specific area of Jewish law. So for example, you have the first section called Seeds that deals with anything pertaining to foods. So all laws pertaining to agriculture, for example, sabbatical year, a tithe, and so on, laws of blessings on food, charity that you give from your food, and so anything pertaining to that would fall under this order, and it would have its own tractate. Then you have an order, for example, called Designated Times, which deals with all laws in Judaism pertaining to particular times. So you'll have a tractate within that order called Shabbat, another one called Rosh Hashanah, another for Yom Kippur, and so on. So in the fourth order, which is called Nizikin, literally translated as damages, which deals with civil and criminal law within Judaism. And of course, it deals with, talking about civil and criminal law. There's a tractate about Sanhedrin, the courts, the Supreme Courts, and laws pertaining to that. And you have a tractate about witnesses and so on. So in the tractate that talks about Sanhedrin, the greater rabbinic court, and deals also with the variety of consequences within Judaism. So at the end of that tractate, it deals with the Messianic era and the resurrection of the dead. And so over there, Maimonides also has his commentary, and over there is where Maimonides codified what's known as the 13 principles of faith, was codified within that chapter, within the tractate of Sanhedrin. So Maimonides generally just commented and added, explanation and so on. But there are 3 places where he has like sort of an introduction. In addition to the actual commentary, and of course, to the beginning of the whole body of work, there's an introduction to the Talmud. Then this one that I mentioned now, talking about the principles of faith, he goes through that, at length. And then the other place that he has an introduction is what we're going to be talking about today. There's a tractate called The Ethics of Our Fathers that deals not just with the law, really beyond the letter of the law. And in addition to actually commenting on this tractate, he also has an introduction. The introduction is actually 8 chapters of introduction. And then there's the introduction to this introduction. And so what we've tried to do this year is to study these 8 chapters. Sometimes they're actually published as a volume in itself, known as the 8 chapters to Maimonides. And we've gone through each week, try to go through 1 chapter a week, pretty much. So let me give you a brief overview of what we studied until now, and then what we're going to be studying today. Really, it's something we can study in itself, but it will add depth if we understand where it's coming from. So Maimonides begins with the premise that if you're talking about ethics, morality, not just in behavior, but also in character, so we need to have first an understanding of the human soul. We need to have the map of the soul, an understanding of the soul, just like in biology, in physical medicine, you have to have an understanding in detail of the physical body before you can get to what's an illness and what's healthy and how to deal with it, how to remedy the illness. So the same would apply to the soul as well. And so therefore he begins with laying out and explaining the map of the soul. And by doing that, he takes issue with other philosophers that preceded him, primarily Plato and Aristotle as well. And the first point that he makes, and this was chapter 1 that we studied, was the idea of how many souls does a human being possess. So I mentioned this in the past, we've studied this, and then I've done summaries on it. But just to be brief about it, Plato was of the opinion that a human being possesses at least 3 souls. What he termed as the nutritive soul, the vital soul, and the psychic soul. You can sort of divide it a little bit differently. You can say, you can term it differently. You can say the vegetative soul, the soul that's just similar to vegetation, which is growth. Then you have the animal soul, which is already some type of vitality, life, energy, willpower, and so on. And then you have the human soul, which would be the seichel, the mind, the psychic soul. And he divided them into 3 distinct souls. And there was a reason why he divided them into 3 distinct souls, for political reasons as well. He used that as a model to construct society, government, and so on. But from an ethical perspective, it has a very strong influence. And I'll explain that in a second. First, let me explain what Maimonides holds, and then we'll see the difference. So Maimonides makes a very strong argument at the beginning that a person possesses 1 soul. They're not 3 distinct souls, they're 1 soul. It's just that this 1 soul has several faculties and several functions. It's not defined by any of these faculties, it's beyond any of these faculties, but it's able to function in all of these different ways. Before we even get to the difference between Plato and Maimonides, just let me point out what it means practically. If we say that you have a vegetative soul, or you have an animal soul, or you have a psychic soul, in other words, the soul is defined by its intellect. You asked, what is the soul? Intellect. The soul is defined by its emotions. What's the soul? Emotions. The soul is defined by its ability to grow and so on and move. So that would mean that the smarter a person is, the more human he is. And the moment we lose our mind, we lose our value. There's no soul, or at least diminished soul. And the same would apply in the other 2 categories as well. So it has a lot of bearing. Maimonides says the soul is beyond definition. It's not defined by its faculties. It's beyond its faculties. It contains faculties. So even if the faculties are not functioning properly, the human soul is not defined. Your humanity is not defined by it. So it has a lot of bearing. And so this maybe explains a little bit where the Nazi philosophy started from, originating in Greek philosophy. So that's a very interesting point. So, but let me move on to Maimonides. So it's 1 soul that has many faculties. What will be a practical difference besides what we mentioned before? So I mentioned this anecdote. They say a legend that Aristotle, which even according to Maimonides is the epitome of the human mind, of the development and the perfection of the human mind. they once caught him doing an immoral act. And so his student says, "Fair, Aristotle, Aristotle, such a thing? How can you do such a thing?" To which he responded and he said, "This is not Aristotle. This is not Aristotle." That was his response. And he sort of split. When I act this way, this is not Aristotle. When you see me studying or giving a lecture, that's Aristotle. But how is he able to differentiate? It wasn't just, a cop-out excuse that exempts him of all responsibility. It's because, again, if you look at the human being as possessing different souls, so that in the vegetative soul, we're similar to all vegetation. It's just about growth. The animal soul, the vital soul, the emotional soul, we're equal to animals in that soul. And the human soul, that's what makes us uniquely human, the psychic soul. And so now this part of me is being governed by my animal soul. So you can't expect that I should be responsible to behave as a human being. When I study, then it's my human soul, my psychic soul in control. But according to Maimonides, that it's one and the same soul. So it's the same soul that studies, and the same soul that's moral, and the same soul that's reactive, and the same soul that's emotional, and the same soul that's growing and eating and so on. And so you can't excuse yourself by saying this is somebody else. It's the same person in all the different activities. And it also has a bearing on the way we behave as well, in addition to immoral. But if we look at a person as different souls, so there are certain areas in our life that we're not expected to be different than other creations in the world. For example, eating. So if we look at, if we have different souls, meaning while we're eating, the soul that's animating and processing and so on is the vegetative soul. So in that aspect of our life, we're no different than a tree or than a plant, right? So we're not expected to be any different. In our emotional life, we're no different than an animal. So we're not expected to be different than an animal. But when it comes to study, academics, that's where we're uniquely human. So which would mean that we can eat like an animal. We can indulge like an animal because those activities are governed by those souls. But if it's the human soul, the same human soul that does all the functions, then you have to eat like a human being. You have to sleep like a human being. You have to engage and so on, because it's the same human that's doing all the functions. So it has a lot of things, and that's the foundation to Maimonides' ethics, is that the ethics is not just when you're studying conceptually, but the ethics actually has to manifest itself in every area of a human life. So that's number one. So once he makes that point, then he moves on to compare and actually not just compare and contrast, but really that Maimonides takes the position of holistic health. And this was unique, going back close to 1,000 years ago, that the body and soul, in addition to having one soul, but if it's the same soul that's governing all the bodily functions, the body and soul are one team. And so they affect each other. And so physical health affects your psychological health, and your psychological health has an effect on your physical health. And therefore, the way you engage in your material life is going to have an effect on your moral and ethical, not just behavior, but character. And vice versa. If you establish a proper moral and ethical character, it actually will have an effect on your physical health as well. And so that's the second point that he makes. And since they overlap, then he moves on that we can use medicine as we know it as a model to understand psychology, if you want to say ethical well-being. So we use the model of health and illness in the body to understand and to replicate that for health and illness in the soul. And so the next point that he makes, which is the main point he takes out of that, is Maimonides' famous position of having a balanced personality, a balanced lifestyle. And he spends a long time, it's a pretty large chapter in that, and that either extreme is unhealthy from a moral perspective. And he says sometimes we think that something in extreme is actually good. It's beyond the letter of the law, if you can say, but actually it's unhealthy. It's actually not a positive thing. And just, I'll give you two examples of what he used very briefly. One example is bravery. Right? Bravery is somebody that's a daredevil, if you want to say that. All right? No fear. That's sometimes looked at as heroic. Celebrated. Think about sportsmen, people that climb Mount Everest, right? And we put them up to a pedestal. They're brave people that have conquered their fears, right? And faced death. And is that positive or negative?
It depends on bravery in what respect. If you're saving someone,
not someone else's life, in your own life.
Oh, okay.
Not someone else's life. That's different.
Of your own life.
Okay. So we look at it as heroic, Maimonides says, but really, if you think about it, it's really being irresponsible.
Right.
Yeah, it's foolish.
It's foolish, right? That we say now that we're 70, 80 years old. But we were 7 or 10 or 17 years old. We didn't say that, right? We thought that we're all. So what's the opposite of bravery? What's the other extreme? Not middle. Cowardness, right? Or you would say, let's say, laziness, if you want to go to that, it's sort of apathetic, let's call it that, right? So again, we understand that that extreme is unhealthy too. But sometimes you think to yourself, you see somebody that's a workaholic, and if you want to even say more extreme, greedy. So you recognize the negativity in that. Then you see somebody that's content, seemingly content. And you say, wow, this guy, that's a good character trait. You're content, you're not, but maybe it's laziness actually. Maybe it's apathy. Maybe it's a form of depression, right? So in other words, when you're in an extreme, you're not driven, it's actually unhealthy. So you need the balance. What's the balance? The balance, we're translating this from his Arabic, but the balance would be translated as courage. So courage is sort of like an in-between. It takes a little bit of the bravery, and at the same time, it takes a little bit of the contentment. It's responsible. So another example would be, think of kindness. Okay, so someone that gives without having the ability of ever saying no. Now, if you're on the receiving end, if your parents always gave and gave, you were excited, right? But really, that's unhealthy, right? It's unhealthy. What would be the opposite? A miser, right? Someone that doesn't give at all. So again, you need the balance. Now, each one can justify themselves. The one that gives can justify. The one that's a miser can also justify. You have to work, you have to teach them a lesson, whatever their justification. But ultimately, it's too much. So you need the balance. You need to be able to incorporate, because the balance, why is it true? Because it's able to not just see both truths of either side, but is able to incorporate both truths. And the fact that you're able to incorporate opposites shows that you're seeking the truth and you're not seeking yourself. So, and he uses actually a model of physical medicine for that matter, because in physical medicine, he says, what is it? It's the same idea. You need the balance, right? So everything is healthy and unhealthy. It's healthy in moderation, unhealthy when it's excessive. Even the most of healthiest food, right? If you can overeat that, you're still going to gain weight. You're still going to be unhealthy. So everything has to be in moderation. You have to find the truth, the benefit in everything. And then he makes a point, okay, so this is all good if you're a balanced person, but most of us are not balanced, or at least not balanced in certain areas of our life. So how do you get back to the balance? And again, he uses medicine as a model for that. Because what do you do in medicine when a person is ill? You give him something that's otherwise poisonous, a drug, right? Or even if it's a natural kind of remedy, you give him something that for a healthy person is not only unnecessary, unhealthy.
Oh, okay.
In other words, what you're doing is you're taking the person, you're saying, you're unhealthy, I'll give you something else unhealthy. In other words, you're taking the person, you're unhealthy here, I'll take you to the opposite extreme of unhealthy. But when you get to the point that you're healed, then you come back to the middle. Then you don't take the drugs anymore. Then you don't take the medicine. So, in other words, you need to go to the opposite extreme in order to eradicate the unhealthy state, but then you have to come back to the middle. You can't go from unhealthy to the middle. When a person is healthy, you can't just say, okay, now live a healthy lifestyle. At this point, it's too late to just live a healthy lifestyle. You need to go to extremes, and only then can you come back to the healthy lifestyle. And the same applies when we talk about moral character, the same thing. If a person has a struggle, it doesn't make this what it is, anger, jealousy, ego, whatever it is, it's not enough to say, okay, from today, I resolve that I'm going to be a good person in this area. You could resolve and you mean well, but it's not going to work. And that's why we make all these resolutions. So we come to Rosh Hashanah, we make all the resolutions, and it doesn't last for more than a week. That's even that's a long time, a whole week, right? Usually doesn't last more than 3 hours. So why? Because we have trained ourselves in a certain behavior, a certain response. If you come back just to the center, remember the center is half here, half here. So you're going to gravitate back to your instinct. You're going to gravitate back to what you're accustomed to. It's not going to work. You need to break that cycle. And the way you do that is you go to the opposite extreme, according to Maimonides. And before you actually become too comfortable there, but you feel that, then you come back to the center. And so that's again the model that he uses. And that's really where the skill of psychological healing, according to Maimonides, is to know how far you need to go, how long the duration, because some things you need longer, some things you need shorter. For example, he says if somebody is suffering from being a miser, right? So you have to go to the opposite extreme, and he has to train himself for a period just to give without thinking. And it's going to be very difficult at the beginning, but that's the opposite extreme. What's if somebody suffers the other way around, that they don't know how to say no? They're just giving and give, they're just lavish. They give, they spend, right? So you need to go back to becoming tight fists for a little bit, right? There's a difference, but because to go from miserly to the balance is harder than to go from spending to moderated spending. So therefore, to go from miser to the other, you'll have to do it for a longer period of time. To go from lavish to the balance, to being miser and back to the center is a shorter period of time. If you don't know when to stop and how long to take it for, you might get stuck in the opposite extreme. And then you're sort of bouncing back, trying to get to the center. So that's really where the skill is. But again, he uses that as a model. Okay, so now that we have that balance, then Maimonides moves to the next chapter. And the next chapter, it's not enough to have a balance. You have to have a purpose for life. Because really, why is the balance so important? Is because there has to be a larger objective to life that then justifies why am I doing something, or why am I not doing something. So therefore, Maimonides says if somebody has a balanced lifestyle, but why are they having a balance? Because it makes them feel good. Then really from an ethical perspective, they're no better than someone that has an unbalanced lifestyle. Because they're both self-centered. So what's the difference if I indulge or if I eat healthy, but ultimately it's because I want to feel good? If that's where it starts and ends, then they're both being selfish.
I have a question.
What? Yeah.
I mean, are you saying it's bad to feel good, or you should?
Well, we're not finished yet. We're not finished. Hold on 1 minute.
Feel good in moderation.
Wait, we're not finished yet. Hold on, we're not finished yet. So therefore, there has to be a larger perspective, a larger objective, which means why am I living for? What's my purpose in life? And then everything has to be justified along that, against that backdrop. Really, that's what it's about. So therefore, the moderation is always about how does this serve that larger goal? So why do I need to be moderation? Because I need to be healthy. Why do I need to be healthy? So I can fulfill my purpose of life. That applies physically as well as emotionally and mentally. So it's, in other words, if we think about it, and let's think about it this way. If I were to ask you, what's the purpose of life? Right? If you look back or look forward, you can redo it and ask yourself, what do I want to live for? What do I want to be remembered as? What do I want to feel at the end of life accomplished? What gives you a sense of accomplishment? Meaning I lived a meaningful and purposeful life, what would that be? So let's do the process of elimination, right? I'm not going to go through everything now, but I'm just going to go to extremes, right? So you understand that a person that's focused on food, we're all focused on food. Food. We're all focused on food. But a person that's focused on food to the extreme, they wake up, they think about food, they talk only about food, they listen to talk shows only about food, they watch TV only about food, they engage only in food activity, they sleep about food, they dream about food, they look forward to food. What's the problem? And healthy food, no, not only healthy food. What's the problem?
That's crazy.
Why is that crazy?
Because
There are some people that do that.
you're obsessed.
So what's if you're obsessed?
You're selfish.
Huh?
There's more in the world of
So in other words, one second, hold on a second. So what we agree is, and I'm using extremes to bring out the point. We agree that just live and be married because tomorrow you'll die is not a purpose for life. Right? So, and anything therefore that just supports my life, if life in itself is not living, breathing is not the purpose, then anything that makes that life sustainable is also not the purpose. So even if the food makes I live, I feel good, I enjoy, but it's all about the I living and enjoying, then there's nothing more than that, then there's no purpose to that. Now replicate that in many other areas. It doesn't have to be food. It could be whatever makes you feel good. But ultimately, if you ask yourself, and what do I get from that? A better lifestyle. If it's a better lifestyle, that's not the objective. Because you have to ask yourself, what am I living for? You can't just say, I'm living to live.
Right.
Yeah.
So am I understanding that in Maimonides' perspective, purpose has to do with connection with other?
Well, wait. We'll get to what we're not finished. We're going to see soon what purposes.
Okay, well, because part of my question is, to some extent, the idea of being obsessed, to use his word, with food might become more of a healthy or understandable and valued purpose if my reason for being obsessed with food is to make sure that the world is fed, so to speak. Right?
Wait. So we'll get to that. Hold on a second. First, we have to get to what the objective is, and then we'll see how everything fits in. Now, so most people will answer that the objective of life is to help others. In some way, it doesn't make the one way. It could be in the medical field to find cures for people. It could be charitable work. It could be academia. It could whatever political, whatever. It doesn't make this what it is, but to help to make the world a better place. If you want to say that in the literal sense, I don't mean from a spiritual sense. I want you to think about it. So I'm going to tell you something that's maybe shocking, but that can't be the purpose either.
Yeah.
Listen, I live a life. If my life, just living, even a good lifestyle, is not the purpose, and your lifestyle, just living, is not the purpose, so I'll support you to have a better life, and you'll support me to have a better. How could that be the purpose? What's the difference? Wait. So think what I'm talking. I know that it's counterintuitive to the way we think and the way we're conditioned to think. But think about what I'm telling you. If life in itself is not the purpose, then supporting life in itself cannot be the purpose.
So if you're helping people, say who are hungry, and you're helping.
I'm not telling you not to help them. Again, we'll soon see how everything fits into the picture. But if I'm helping people who are hungry to eat,
Right.
because so that they could live, and that's where it starts and ends. I can live and you can live, we can both live. I'll make your life better, it'll be better for everybody. Then that's not a purpose.
But when the people
That's a short-term purpose, maybe. I mean, I'm not telling you. So therefore, what you have to come to the conclusion is that there is something larger than life.
I'm sorry.
Something larger than life. Something greater that we live for. And life serves that purpose. And as part of that purpose, everything that we talked about falls into place. So I need to live, and I need to be healthy, and I need to be balanced, and I need to be rested, and I need to be in the right frame of mind so that I can live, so I can do my purpose. I need to help you so that you can do your purpose.
Right.
I need to help you so I could be, maybe part of that is being selfless. And the selflessness is, again, letting go of just myself. And that's part of the larger purpose. But ultimately, it's about something greater. Life is here for an objective, for a purpose that's greater than life. Life is the medium. Life is not the objective. So therefore, in Judaic terms, we call that God, right? God is supernatural. God is beyond life. God is beyond humanity. You can take the word God and translate it in your own way. That doesn't make a difference. But ultimately, when we say God, we mean truth, we mean holiness, we mean miraculous, we mean selfless, all those terms, right? And none of those terms, because God is not defined by any of it, but that's what it's about. It's really about transcending our humanity. In order to be able to do that, we first need to have a self that we can jump beyond. We need to have a self that we can be selfless. We need to have, right? So that's really what it's about. So it's not about, Maimonides doesn't take the theology of abstination. That's not the point. The point is, how do I use everything that I was given to serve that purpose? My physical health, my mental health, my emotional health, my social health, my communal health, my national health, my universal, everything. How do I use that to serve this purpose? How do I transcend my own humanity? How do I assist all of humanity to transcend and to become really focused on purpose and on selflessness? So balance is the same point. If what does balance say? Balance means I have to justify it. There's accountability. There's accountability for everything that I engage in. What is the accountability? Does it serve my purpose? Does it support my purpose? Does it magnify my purpose? Or does it detract from my purpose? That's the question. That's what you have to always ask yourself. And so therefore, what Maimonides says, the moral and ethical person doesn't just ask himself, am I balanced? But really asks himself the larger question, is it serving the purpose? Not the selfish purpose, but is it serving the larger purpose? Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to sure I'm understanding you. So I hear what you're saying as Maimonides is believing as a presupposition that there is this other, or not, I shouldn't use other, but there's this, whatever we call God, all right, that's true and real. And therefore, everything that's in a sense ultimately healthy and good needs to be aimed in the understanding and truth and whatever other language you want to use, right? Because it's also just as possible that there is no other, and therefore
There's no purpose to life then.
well, the purpose of life could be what we see in the entire animal kingdom,
Which is no purpose to life,
well,
just to
that's
live.
one way- from that perspective, that's true. But
We call it survival of the fittest.
no. But that's one possible consequence. Another possible consequence is using that balance to facilitate the highest quality of life for.
So
both humans and
let me,
others.
I hear what you say. Let me just say from a philosophical perspective for 1 second. If we say that there is no intelligent design, I'll use that term, okay? Meaning nobody planned this. It's a big bang, it happened, it's an accident. Then there's no need for purpose. If life came about by chance, then design plays no role.
That's true.
The only reason that a person is looking for purpose is because otherwise life is not justified. Why not?
The purpose is a human construct. Okay? That would be part of my starting point. In other words,
If it's a human construct,
all right,
then I don't have to agree with your.
that's true.
So if I don't have to agree, then I am perfectly good if I want to live a chaotic life, not just me, but if I want to promote a chaotic lifestyle.
Not if we understand part of that as, I'm not sure we should just have this.
No. You bring up a very good point. See, the reason that I'm going through this is because what I want to get to is a human being. We human beings have an innate sense of purpose. It's not a construct. It's something we're born with. Every child, before they had it, even though there's a selfishness to every child, but every human being innately has a drive for purpose. Not just accomplishment that survivors of the fittest, but really a purpose. Which means, where does that come from? It can't be that if creation was, it can't be if creation is by chance, meaning the DNA of creation should not demand purpose. The fact that the DNA of creation demands purpose means that creation has a soul, has a selflessness by definition. Purpose means selflessness. This part we agree, purpose means selflessness, letting go of the self, something.
Selfless, not entirely necessarily, no.
If it's not selfless, then it's selfish. So there's no in between.
But there's balance.
That, what's the balance between true and false? What's the in between the true and false? Half true.
Well, you're applying.
Okay, we'll get back to it, but I just.
Okay, a baby is born, and this baby is born, and this baby is born, okay? One wants to become a doctor, and one wants to become a gambler. How does that happen?
I'm not going to go through all
No,
things, but I'm just going to answer your question with a joke. That a Jewish mother was once walking with two of her little children of 3 years old, and she meets a friend. He says, "This is the doctor, and this is the lawyer." Nobody is born a doctor, and nobody. 1 minute. Let me finish. Wait. Nobody is born a gambler. Every human being is born. This is irrelevant to what we spoke before. Every human being is born with a drive to succeed. We spoke about this in other classes as well. In education and as well as psychology, sometimes we have the question of you see a kid or you see an adult ruining their life or unhappy or not driven or apathetic. How do we get them motivated? How do we get them excited? And really the question is a wrong question, because every human being naturally wants to be happy, naturally wants to succeed, and naturally do anything. Something along the way, nurture, not nature, caused them to give up, caused them to question themselves. What we need to do as educators or as professionals is to find that obstacle, that blockage, and remove the blockage. We don't need to inspire. They're inspired naturally. They just don't believe in themselves anymore. So, okay, so this is irrelevant if that drive is selfish or selfless. But that's a good discussion. We'll maybe get back to that. So let me just, I want to move to today's discussion. I don't know how far we're going to get today. But in all honesty, this is what Maimonides is writing is really irrelevant to what we discussed before, because yes, Maimonides is taking a religious approach. So the answer, I was making the argument because this religious approach, I think, is a philosophical, rational approach. It's not a faith-based approach. But for now, yeah, Maimonides is coming from a commentary to the Talmud, which is obviously going to be a religious approach, was then the premise is there's a God, and that has to. Okay, so now what he moves on to today is, once we have established, again, one soul, so you're responsible in every one of your activities, and the balance, and how do you get to the balance, and then the balance has to be against the backdrop of purpose, larger than yourself, God, and so on. Now the question becomes, and this is today's chapter, and I think I'm not going to have time to read it aside, so I'll give you a little bit of the outside of it. And that is the debate. What is more virtuous? Effort, a person that's struggling with negative desires and negative drives, and is struggling against, yeah. They have all these internal negativities, whether it's, again, anger or jealousy or immoral, whatever it should be, it doesn't make this what it is. And they struggle against it. So what you have is in behavior, let's assume for a second, in behavior, they mastered that they're in control. They're not going to allow the internal feelings, passions, to express itself. But as a person, they feel negative about themselves. Why do I even have such cravings? Why do I even have such passions? Why do I even why? So yes, I didn't act on them, and then you have the person that loves doing what's right and loathes anything that's negative. I don't know if you met any such people. I've maybe 5 people in my whole life, right? Those rare few people, and that's like the virtuous person, right? So which one is really greater? So in this chapter, he discusses this question. And what's interesting, in Maimonides makes a certain differentiation, sort of like a reconciliation. And then I want to really get to another way of looking at it. But I want, from a philosophical, again, from a rational perspective, not from a religious perspective. He quotes philosophers. He doesn't mention them by name, because in his introduction, he says, I'm not going to mention by name who I'm quoting, because then some people are going to say, oh, he said it, I'm not going to listen. So I'm just going to tell you what I think is but then he quotes, this is Greek philosophy, which is that virtuous is somebody that doesn't have these negative passions. So it's not only in behavior are they perfect, but in character, sort of, they're perfect. They don't want to do negative. They only want to do positive, right? And somebody that's it's called a man of restraint, which is he has the negative passion, but he just controls themselves. Such a person is in a lower rank in ethical virtue, according to philosophy. Okay, but according to religion, and he seems to quote some verses that seem to support that philosophical approach, but then he brings in from a religious perspective that's in the contrary. That actually not only is restraint of greater virtue, but actually we find Talmudic teachings that say a person should not say, this thing, ugh, I hate it, it's disgusting, I would never do it, right? No, you could say, I would do it, I enjoy it, I would engage in it, but what should I do that God says I shouldn't? What should I do that, there's a certain bar that bar says that it's wrong. So you see that in religion, it promotes more the restraint in a way than, if you will call it, the virtue, the piousness, so to speak. And in this particular chapter, he differentiates, and it says, depends what we're talking about. There is a truth to what the philosophers are saying in certain characteristics, and there's then what religion is talking about. So there are certain characteristics that are innately wrong, inherently wrong. For example, murder, stealing, deception. These things are inherently wrong. And therefore, in these things, if a person says, I'm a psychopath, I want to murder somebody, right? Or what's the term for somebody that has a kleptomania, right? Or I don't know what they use the term for deception. I mean, this is maybe we use the term economy. I don't know what, but right, you have the few far in between, honest people. But these areas that are inherently wrong and negative, in these areas, if a person has a drive for them and they're just refraining, then obviously a person that's of moral character, that they can't bring themselves to do these wrongs, is obviously of greater value, of greater virtue than the other. But when we talk about things pertaining to religion, as he puts them, traditional law, as he words them, then in those areas, the only reason really why you're refraining is because God said so, not because you have a problem with it. So, for example, for a Jew not to eat ham, he shouldn't say, ugh, disgusting, how could he even eat that? No, it might be great. I would really want to eat it. What should I do? The Torah says I'm not allowed to, so I'm not allowed to. So then, on the contrary, a person that says I'm not eating it because I don't like it, versus a person that says I like it but I'm not allowed to, which one is more virtuous? The second one, right? So it depends what we're talking about, and in everything you have to examine: is it inherently wrong, or is it only wrong because God said, or because a set of laws, or whatever it should be? And then you tell yourself, I really have no problem, but I'm doing it because that's the right thing. Self-control.
Okay, so
Self-control. The whole idea, my vision is to eliminate ham and to eliminate this or that or the other, or certain things that you refer to that are immoral or unethical. It's a matter of self-restraint.
I mean, I could think of, I mean, didn't you ever want to murder somebody?
Right, that's what I was just thinking.
I can think of 3 people right now I want to murder.
Pull your children.
I'm not gonna do it,
But you don't do it.
but I know if it was the right thing, if I could do it, not just legally, if I could do it, I would do it.
I don't believe it.
You don't believe me?
I don't either.
You don't know me.
No, I don't
You don't know yourself.
It's
No, I'm serious what I'm saying though.
I'm
You
not
can
gonna
have-
say who, but there are
No,
people
you can have a
that I don't know
passion.
to you that I would like to murder.
You can have-
That-
You can have, it's good that the camera's not looking at you. It's, it's good to have, you know, it's okay that we have these passions, but we say, oh, okay. But practically speaking, at least most people cannot do
We
it.
won't do it.
You know, the former chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau, I don't know if you're familiar with him, his son now is the chief rabbi. He was a Holocaust survivor. And he was a child. He was a young child. He started at 7 at the beginning of the war. He was a young child. And if I recall correctly what he said, at the end of the war, when they came to liberate his camp, I think that one of the soldiers, I don't know which nationality, gave him a gun and said, "You can do whatever you want." In other words, you can, those persons that you can do what you want, do what you have to. And he says, there was no way I can do it. There was no way I can do it. He says, that's not my revenge. Of what am I going to gain if the other person dies? My revenge is to live a life that they wanted to take away from me.
I think that's true.
So let me just finish with one thing. Maimonides says in a different place, and I want to bring this in because it also applies to, even though he says things that are inherently wrong, it's better not to even want them. There's a term in Judaism called a tzaddik. Tzaddik means a righteous person, a person that's, if you want to call it, perfect in moral character. And you have what's called a Baal Tshuva. Baal Tshuva is somebody that repented, somebody that did wrong or wants to do wrong and then sort of remedy their ways. And which one is greater? I mean, it's sort of the same kind of question, right? The person that tasted something negative is always going to have an appreciation for that and is always going to have to refrain themselves from that engagement. And so the same question, what's greater, a person that's naturally perfect, right? Sort of angelic, if you want to say, or the Baal Tshuva, which we should all be, by the way. It's not, you don't need to, everybody in their own life has what we need to fix. And what Maimonides says is that a Baal Tshuva should never say that I'm second class. Because actually in Judaism, there's a Talmudic teaching that the space where a Baal Tshuva stands spiritually, a tzaddik could never attain that level. And the reason is precisely because they tasted it, and therefore they have an attraction to it, and they refrain from it. That takes much more character. And not just, and therefore their service, their divine service, is of much more value than someone that never had a challenge. And so, yes, we do need the tzaddikim. They're sort of the lamplight, the sort of the guide, the light in the middle, at night, sort of to remember what we're looking forward, we're trying to be. But practically, what's expected in Judaism of the average person is to be what's called a Beinoni, which means an average, a middle, which means it's okay if you have internal feelings and passions, even if they're negative, but we really have to be in behavior, we have to attempt to be as perfect. So behavior doesn't just mean action, it means speech. That's a very hard one. And as much as humanly possible, even in thought. Now, thought is much more difficult because thought we don't always have control. Well, so let me just finish this line. We don't always have control, but at least we shouldn't do it willingly. So, you're thinking negative, try to stop yourself or distract yourself somewhere else. But in speech and in action, we never have an excuse. There's nothing forcing us to speak or to act in a certain way. So that's what's expected from the average person. And that's also not easy, by the way.
As a child is not born a doctor, and as a child is not born a lawyer, a child is not born a chassid. Okay, to be a chassid, you have to achieve it. Okay, and to achieve it, you have to go through some maze that includes, you know, the temptation that we find as youth, we don't have the maturity, okay? And we let the emotions of the body and all these things, you know, take hold of us. But when the maturity arises and you achieve chassidut, okay, after that. So I don't believe that, you know.
You said very
that-
well.
Huh?
You said, well, that's perfect. That's exactly what it is. But I just want to add a certain, as we say in Yiddish, a knetch, certain nuance. What you're saying is we're not supposed to seek out challenges. Life gives us enough challenges that we don't have to see. And I shouldn't say, well, look, let me first taste sin and then I'll decide if I want to. Because then you put yourself in a predicament. So sin will come your way, whether you want it or not, right? So you don't, every morning in prayer, we ask God, don't give us a test, please. You know, we don't want it. It's not something you have to want. But the reality is that, yes, we're created imperfect humans. And perfection means not just, you know, certain strengths and weaknesses, but also, you know, moral character strengths and weaknesses. And yes, we learn from these mistakes and we grow upon them. But we'll never actually attain perfection. Well, and that's never expected of us. What's expected of us is to get up every time we fall, try again, get up again, try again. And really it's about recognizing that each effort, each time you got up, that momentary success is not a momentary success. It's an infinite success. That's what life is about. It's about getting up, trying. The trying in itself is already a victory. I think we'll stop here. We should have read it inside. There's a lot more to talk about. But so tomorrow's class is Everyday Ethics. That's 9:15.
Class every day?
Every morning, yes.
At 9:15,
Yeah.
10:15?
Till about 10:15. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank
You.
That was very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sometimes getting